Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
For almost a month now, our attention has been riveted on what's happening in Ladakh, on our borders, or our line of actual control that we share with China. Who's where? Is Chinese PLA on this side or it's on their own side? Those are very important debates. Those go on. But when you start analyzing it, or when you start decluttering it, or looking at the big picture, then you realize that very often there are three reasons why our strategic analysis can go wrong. One, we focus too much on here and now. What is it that we see? What is it that catches our attention most of all? What is it that bothers us most of all? And what is it that irritates us most of all? Now, my early teaching in management from a very learned, very experienced, successful person was, in management, you must understand that usually what irritates you the most at any moment is not the most important thing substantively. It irritates you the most because you respond to it, and that's usually then becomes a problem, a pitfall of getting trapped in a tactical response instead of a strategic one. The second reason our strategic analysis goes wrong is because we talk amongst ourselves, we read amongst ourselves, we build our own little echo chambers or ecosystems, and we feed off that system. Some people we agree with, some people we disagree with. People we agree with, we use them to validate our theories, and in the process also revalidate their theories. And people we disagree with, we tend to then position ourselves in the opposite direction, judge them or whatever. And that's why this analysis go wrong. So it's important to open out and look at the debate elsewhere and find other voices, other experts. And third very important thing is find the big picture, because what is bothering you or your interests or your company or your country may not be the most substantive issue, and what's bothering somebody else also may be relevant to your problems. So once again, our instinct is to focus on what is relevant to you right now. बाकी जो होता है मेरे बाप का क्या जाता है. That is not how larger strategic questions are answered. So today, since I'm talking about the India-China situation, we have the benefit of a wonderful article that C. Raja Mohan has written in the Indian Express. I will give you a link to that article in the description of today's Cut the Clutter. Please read that. Now, C. Raja Mohan is, people often say, and quite rightly, people of my generation, that Dr. K. Subramanian was the father of Indian strategic thought. If he was the father of India's strategic thought in the Cold War era, then certainly that mantle has now fallen on the shoulders of C. Raja Mohan. Now, he writes today in his article, Raja Mandala, that's his column, he says that, look, all of you who think that China is pushing India in Ladakh because India has come close to America, all of us, India is being very enthusiastic about the Quad with Japan, Australia, America, you are wrong. Because if you were not wrong, and he gives you examples, he says you are wrong and you're falling prey to simplistic understanding of a more complex situation. Again, for the three reasons that I mentioned to you earlier in the very beginning. So he gives first the example of Indonesia. Now, Indonesia is not a country that's next door to China. He says that, look, Indonesia now has trouble with the Chinese over what is called as Natuna Sea. Now, Natuna Sea is a part of South China Sea, but very far from China. It's 1500 kilometers from China. Indonesia has a bunch of islands after which this little sea or this section of South China Sea is named. These are called Natuna Islands. These are 272 islands. Again, quite some distance from Indonesian mainland also, but very far from China. How can you have a property dispute 1500 kilometers from your shores? So what the Chinese are saying is that, look, we may not own these islands, but we have traditional rights to economically exploit and fish in the exclusive economic zone around these islands. Now, UN Convention on Laws of the Seas gives any country, any sovereign, the right over the waters. So, about 12 nautical miles are your territorial waters. You can question anybody coming in. Beyond 12 nautical miles, 200 nautical miles is your exclusive economic zone. It is international waters. Anybody can go there shipping, or ships can go up and down. But for economic exploitation, that's exclusive to the sovereign. So once you have an island someplace, you again get your territorial waters and your exclusive economic zone. Chinese are claiming their own exclusive economic zone rights there. I am oversimplifying it, but Chinese are saying that we can also exploit this economically. Now Indonesians have gone to the UN. They have written to the UN Secretary General just last week. What can the UN do to tell the Chinese to get off Indonesia's backs? The president of Indonesia has actually visited the islands just to assert his sovereignty, his country's sovereignty. I'm quoting all this from Raja Mohan's article today. I didn't know all this because I don't read up everything. And then I've had Srijan Shukla, my young colleague, to research more on this. And that's how I bring this presentation to you. So they've written to UN Secretary General, visited the islands. And the Chinese spokesman, on the other hand, has said whether the Indonesian side accepts it or not, nothing will change the fact that China has rights and interests over the relevant waters. So the Chinese just walk in there. Indonesians have even sunk a Chinese fishing vessel, but Chinese couldn't be bothered. So this is 1500 kilometers away from China's coasts. Now, what is Indonesia? You might say China is upset with India right now because India is joining hands with America, and India is a key member of Quad, which is seen as an alliance to balance Chinese power in this region, in the Indo-Pacific. But Indonesia has done no such thing. Indonesia is equidistant on Indo-Pacific. Indonesia has not joined the Quad. Indonesia is also, Raja Mohan points out, the founding member of the non-aligned movement. In fact, in 1955, April, the Bandung conference was held in Indonesia, which was an Afro-Asian nations conference, mostly nations which had just been decolonized, and that was the precursor to the non-aligned movement. So Bandung is where the foundation of the non-aligned movement was philosophically laid. So Indonesia is not a country which is causing any offense or any irritation to China, but still the Chinese are going 1500 kilometers away and giving the Indonesians a hard time and pushing them around quite rudely. Then you have the Philippines. Philippines is headed by, in 2016, Rodrigo Duterte came to power, such as he is. He's a funny guy, very dictatorial also. But that besides, in 2016 he came to power and he's thought he will make some fundamental shifts in the Philippines. All these strong big guys, when they come to power, like Mr. Modi also, they think that they will come and make big fundamental shifts. And then they realize that it's not all in their hands, because they may be all powerful in their countries, but there are other countries which don't bother. And for many of these people in Asia, that other country is China, or that other leader is Xi Jinping. So 2016, Duterte came and he said he will mend his relationship with China. Now the Philippines, you remember, is the oldest, among the oldest allies of America in Asia. The Philippines has always had US troops on its soil. The Philippines is the most Americanized of Asian countries, so much so that not now, but in not very distant past, the biggest hit show on Filipino TV used to be The Price is Right, which is a very popular American show, but not the Filipino version of The Price is Right, the original American version of The Price is Right. So it was very much influenced by America in many ways, and Duterte thought he will change it. So Duterte embraced China. He went to China, he made friends with China, he reached out, and he thought he will use this outreach and his distancing from America now to get the Chinese to settle their maritime borders dispute with the Philippines. To please China, to appease China, last February, he even abrogated or announced that he will abrogate what is called as the Visiting Forces Agreement. That is the agreement that allows US troops to remain in the Philippines. Now, even after that, the Chinese kept pushing at him. In fact, it pushed and pushed and pushed. And there is a line from Raja Mohan's article. He says, relentless PLA pressure on the South China Sea islands claimed by Manila and including them in the new Chinese districts map. So China actually issued a new map of its districts and included South China Islands, which belong to the Philippines. Now we know there's been an old problem with the Spratly and Paracel Islands. I don't have the time to go into all that with Vietnam, between Vietnam, China, the Philippines. But in this case, in spite of the outreach, the Chinese continued. So what's happened? Just now, just last week, while in February, Duterte had said that he was abrogating this Visiting Forces Agreement with America and thereby withdrawing the rights for American soldiers to be on the Filipino soil. Last week he said that he was suspending that decision, which means he'll carry on being an ally of the Americans and under American security umbrella, which is the implication of having American troops on your soil. So once again, you have two very different situations. Indonesia, which had nothing to do with America, which had nothing to do with Indo-Pacific or American project in Indo-Pacific or the Quad, that's being pushed around by China. And the Philippines, which has been an ally of America, which decided to stop being an ally, at least in the military sense, and reach out to China with a hand of friendship and maybe peacemaking, but China rebuffed that also and pushing them around. So this tells you that this idea that China is pushing India in Ladakh because India is getting friendly with America is simplistic and it is too narrow. And this is tactical, not strategic. Now, there are some other readings and writings that Srijan has sent to me. There is an article from Richard Hidaran, who is a columnist and author, and he's written many books, but famously also a book titled The Indo-Pacific, Trump, China, and the New Struggle for Global Mastery. He says that the change has come about, the change in Duterte's mind between February and now has come about because Philippines has growing anxieties over China's strategic opportunism in the South China Sea during the COVID-19 pandemic, which has created a dangerous security vacuum in Asia, and Chinese expansionism has been creeping as its rivals struggle to contain coronavirus outbreaks. Now, that is happening in South China Sea. You extrapolate the same explanation to the Himalayas and Ladakh. India is struggling with coronavirus. India's friends are struggling with coronavirus. China is much stronger than India. It has an economy of $14 trillion. India will be less than 3 trillion this year. So it's 5 times as big as India. So China now thinks that it now enjoys sufficient military, economic, political and diplomatic superiority or disparity vis-a-vis all its neighbors to shift the borders as it wants to do that. So what it's doing in Ladakh or vis-a-vis India is also what it's doing in the seas with all these other countries. And those other countries are friends of America's and not friends of America's. Also a friend of America which was even willing to give up America to embrace China, but that hasn't worked because once again, the Chinese way of looking at big power, practice of big power is not the conventional way. You are dealing with something new. The world is dealing with something new now. So the conventional analysis does not work with China. So look at all the things that have happened between China, what China has done to its other neighbors in its front yard, so to say. It has sunk a Vietnamese fishing boat. It has pointed a laser gun at a Filipino naval vessel, warship. It has harassed a Malaysian oil drill ship. It has also spooked the world, particularly the region, but the entire world with a PLA source, a leak from PLA, saying that China is planning to set up an air defense identification zone across the disputed waters of South China Sea, which means they will then monitor who's flying in that area and who is sailing in that area, which means actually controlling that area, or in a way kind of military sovereignty in that area. Again, it's worrying a lot of people. So I have again a quote from Natasha Kassam, who's a research fellow at very reputed Australian think tank Lowy Institute, and she's also a former Australian diplomat. She points out that, see, even in Australia, because Australia demanded an investigation in where this coronavirus has come from and how did China handle it, China first threatened Australia with a consumer boycott. After that, they announced tariffs on Australian barley, apparently after an 18-month investigation showing that Australia was not following WTO rules. Then it imposed a ban on some of Australia's meat producers. Australia, in response, has now set up a foreign investment review board, which is now to examine all investments coming from China in sensitive security businesses, which I presume will include telecom and 5G. And those rules now say that this board will examine all its investments, no matter what the size. So which means if it's a very small investment, it will not go through unreviewed. If it's a very large investment, it will not go unreviewed, on the belief that this is too big for us to say no to. So that's a big change. In fact, Barry O'Farrell, the new Australian High Commissioner to India, spoke to Economic Times just a couple of days back, and he said everybody is worried about this coercive use of Coast Guard and maritime militias by the Chinese. In fact, in a Walk the Talk interview several years ago, Peter Verghese, who is one of Barry O'Farrell's predecessors, and he was a very wise man. He's now working for a think tank and writing thoughtful stuff. Peter Verghese had said, talking about China, that it's important for all of us, all the countries around China, to keep talking, because all of us have a common vested interest in the peaceful rise of China. If I translate it, what it means is that the rise of China is an inevitability. How to make sure it doesn't destabilize anything. Now Xi Jinping has decided that he doesn't particularly care what happens as a consequence of the way he will flaunt the rise of China. If it destabilizes the world or Asia, that is the problem of the world and Asia. They have to learn to accept this new reality of an expansionist, arrogant and ambitious China. Ambitious also territorially. China is now the only sizable nation in the world which has territorial ambitions. Now, going back to Raja Mohan and going back to all the other experts that we have read and we have quoted from, the argument is that the world is moving from US-centric unipolarity. After the Cold War, we were a unipolar world. From US-centric unipolarity, the world is moving to a China-centric bipolarity, which means it's bipolar, but it's more weighted towards China. Why? Because under Donald Trump, America has withdrawn from the world. America has been nasty to its allies, Japan, Germany, Europe. You see what South Korea, you see what it has done to them. It's been talking about sending bills to them, so they pay for their security. So China knows that American power around the world has now weakened. So it has become more a China-centric bipolarity, and even if that is not the case in all of the world, this is definitely the case in Asia now, because in Asia, China is a very dominant power. And once again, to give you some idea of this relative power structure or power balance, I go back to Lowy Institute. The Lowy Institute has done a ranking of the power of the countries by their clout in Asia. So, and this is for 2019. So I bet this will change this year. So US has been ranked with 85.5 points, the most powerful nation in Asia. Number 2 is China with 75.9. Between 85.5 and 75.9, there isn't that much gap, and that was last year. This year, if anything, China has become more powerful, America has become weaker. So I'll wait for the 2020 rankings to come out. Maybe China will even leave the US behind, and then you will know further evidence why this bipolarity in the balance of power is weighted towards China and increasingly so in Asia. And then you look at other countries. Japan is 42.5, which is exactly a half of America. America 85.5, China 75.9, Japan 42.5, India is 41, Russia is 35, South Korea is 32.7, Australia is 31.3. So in conclusion, I come back to again a quote from another wonderful columnist, Gideon Rahman of Financial Times, who I know well and who respect greatly, and who I read regularly, no matter what he writes on. And he says that there is growing concern about China's behavior, not just in Washington, but in Delhi, London, Tokyo, and Canberra. And why is China behaving the way it is? He says it's a combination of pride and paranoia. Pride comes from the fact that Chinese Navy now has more ships and submarines than US Navy. They may not be as powerful and big, but it has more ships and submarines than the US Navy. And even lately, suddenly there's been an imbalance in those areas because USS Theodore Roosevelt, which is a big aircraft carrier, it had to go back from there because, as you would remember, a lot of its sailors got COVID positive because the virus spread on the ship. And he says that while they see all this power rising, the Chinese internet is now bubbling with nationalistic chatter about the inexorable rise of China. So that is what you are dealing with. So don't look at the Chinese that they've come to teach you a little lesson because you're friendly with America. And if you go back to being friendly with them, the Chinese will be kind to you. What the Chinese are telling India is exactly what they are telling Indonesia, Vietnam, Australia, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and in fact to Washington. This is China's message to the whole world. So once again, look at it like that and then find a way of navigating this. Indian military can handle military challenges on the ground, push comes to the shove. But you are now looking at a completely altered global balance of power and reality. And I don't see it changing until the US elections. Because really, for all his heavy boasting and talk, what Trump has done is, Trump has completely undermined America's own power. He's all talk, no fight. Just exactly the opposite of the way a big power should exercise its influence and authority. So that imbalance and that vacuum is what China has moved into. It just so happens that we live in China's neighborhood.